Everyone, we are here because we need to save the yellow taxi industry. The yellow taxi is an icon of New York City. In recent years, major credit unions have historically served the industry, have faced mounting red ink and been taken over by state authorities. And many individual medallions owners are facing foreclosure and bankruptcy, upending their personal lives and destroying their savings and hurting their families. These are small businesses owners, many of them immigrants who invested in a medallion in hope of achieving their slice of the American dream. Support.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee and to respond honestly to Councilmember questions?
I do.
I do. Thank you. You may begin.
I'm MEERA JOSHI, Commissioner and Chair of the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. Because historically medallion purchases are financed purchases, discussion of valuation must include a review of lending practices over time. As with the housing market, liberal lending practices can increase both demand and prices, and conservative lending practices lower them. Prior to 2014, many banks offered no or low deposit balloon loans that were due in full after 3 years, requiring frequent refinancing, often at much higher interest rates. With each refinancing, many banks offered to lend additional funds, further increasing the debt burdened on the borrower. As the loan increased, so did the price at which medallions were bought and sold in private transactions, and consequently, the higher the sale price, the more banks were willing to loan. Today, banks and their regulators recognize that value must be tied directly to income stream and service levels. Regulators are scrutinizing medallion portfolios and, in some cases, taking over the lending institution after uncovering unsound banking practices. There are few available funds to finance medallions, so when sales occur, they are most frequently either seller-financed or cash transactions. As I mentioned before, medallions still sell, but at lower prices than their historic highs, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Because many of the medallion loans, as you know, are hitched to outstanding loans that are difficult to pay back in these times, and also difficult to understand in terms of the meaning of the valuation, because they are far greater, the outstanding loans, than what today's sales prices are. And so coming to an agreement with banks on how to right-size those loans could be an incredible benefit for the individual borrowers.
Can you come with us, please? ¿Pueden venir para acá ustedes? Can bring them here if you don't mind. Páraseme aquí. I just want for my colleague, for the audience in the TLC to know, these are the faces of individual medallion owners. This family came to me like few years ago. The gentleman here, he believed that by investing in a medallion, he was securing his retirement. Now he's been dealing with top medical health issues. And his wife and him is trying to survive. And I think that when we have this conversation, as we will be, listening to testimony and my colleague asks questions, I just want everyone to understand that this family represents 6,000 individual medallion owners that they don't know what to do. Because the promise the dream that we sold to them, 30, 40, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that it was safe for them to invest and that they could have their retirement secure. That's not happening today.
Well, I mean, I look a lot out here and I see a lot of familiar faces of individual owners that whose stories I personally know because they've come in our office and we've discussed them, and we've had a very long hearing. I think it lasted 6 hours in April, which was, for anyone who attended, extremely painful. The stories one after another for that length of time of the financial crisis that many families are in because of the outstanding loans they have. I think you'd have to be made of metal not to have that affect you. The questions that often came to us were, the loan is outstanding. Should I pay back the loan? Should I go into bankruptcy? What's the best course of action? That people have somebody to talk to independently about what their choices are, as hard as those choices may be.
Commissioner, I appreciate what the city has done, but I really wonder if it's enough. I have met with constituents who are in danger of losing their homes because they bet on a regulated market in New York City, and the price has dropped almost 90%, which is not quite tulip bulb mania proportions, but it's pretty bad. And while I've listened to what you've had to say, and I appreciate, I don't really get a sense of urgency here. This is an extremely important industry in the city of New York. It employs thousands and thousands of people, many of whom are my constituents. And I really would like to get more of a sense of urgency out of the Taxi and Limousine Commission. And I'd like to hear from you what steps you think we should be taking to level the playing field so that people who drive yellow cabs who entered into a contract with the city of New York can come home every night and feed their families and pay their mortgages.
So I think there's one aspect, which is the lending aspect, something that, we as the commission and you as the council may have limited authority, but there are outstanding loans that are very difficult to pay back and represent an amount that is not matching what the medallion is worth. So a way to right-size those loans, I think, would create incredible relief for medallion owners. There are also other things that I think we can work on together. There's the ability of taxis to do work beyond traditional hail, and we'd love to explore that with the taxi industry on how they can do more prearranged work and do work through apps so that they are getting the same passenger base that Uber and Lyft are getting. There's a generation out there that only looks at their phone to get car service, and we need to make sure that taxis are well positioned so that they're one of the options when somebody does.
I appreciate that many of the people in the city, including many of my constituents, love the new app services. But I'm wondering if the playing field is really level for everybody. I know that taxi passengers have to pay a surcharge at certain times. Taxis should all be, in my opinion, should be handicap accessible, but that's not required for some of the other app services. And I'm wondering if there's room there, wiggle room there that the Commission has considered so that we can level the playing field.
In terms of accessibility, in July we published proposed rules that would put accessibility mandates on the for-hire sector. Today, well, let me actually step back to clarify the existing accessibility mandates for the for-hire sector, which is to provide equivalent service. And our proposal is much more tailored mandates so that they get there. We're having a hearing on that rulemaking this week on Thursday. I know that there's other proposals that people think are more fitting, so we'll hear those as well as hearing from passengers who have felt the gap in service as the app-based for-hire vehicle services have become more and more popular with the general public.
You had mentioned, and you addressed it when you were speaking to me, that some of this may have been, some of the bubble, whatever we want to call it, in the price of medallions, may have been contributed to by Easy Credit or something like that. But at the same time, this city in 2014 auctioned off medallions at an average price of $1.2 million. So do you feel that the city was taking advantage of that bubble? That's a lot of money. It brought in a lot of money, and traditionally the sales of medallions, new medallions, have brought in, a huge bankroll for the city of New York.
The funds, the determination of what the upset price is for an auction is set by the Office of Management and Budget based on past transactions. My understanding is it's based on past transactions. So they look at what the most recent out-of-auction transactions are, and they come up with an upset price. The upset price, which I don't have off the top of my head for both of those auctions, although Midori can get it for us and I can get it to you shortly, is basically what the minimum bid was. And those medallions did sell for well over those upset prices. I can't speak to exactly the thought process when that auction was being held or when it was designed. That was a different administration and different architects, but I can say that our
But it took
purpose-
place, this administration took office in
The
14,
2014
15,
one did,
yes.
yeah.
It was already here.
It was already, the 2013 one was the larger one in the fall, and the scheduling of the 2014 ones, I think, was well underway. So yes, you're correct. It did happen under this administration, not under my leadership. I wasn't there at the time of those auctions because I left city service for a few months and came back. But I don't want to separate myself from those auction prices because those are real numbers and those are real loans. And as Chairman Rodriguez pointed out, those are real individuals behind each one of those loans, which is something we need to address. But the sale prices are based on what's happened recently, and that's where OMB gets the upset price number.
So I guess if we did another sale, those prices would be much lower.
Yeah, and I think the thought that I didn't finish is what our concern is service, that there's cars on the street and that there's people that can get accessible taxis when they need them. There's people who can hail a taxi if they don't have a smartphone, if they don't have a credit card, or they choose not to use it, and that there's a version of for-hire transportation that people cannot be refused from. The first car that you see is the one that needs to pick you up. And if that doesn't happen, and there are those occasions where that doesn't happen, and we're disappointed every time we hear about them, when people report that to us, we are able to prosecute those drivers.
I mean, it's just really sad. I mean, I remember in the previous administration, in the Bloomberg administration, the taxi medallion was helping to fill the budget gap. And they were selling for a lot of money, and the city was basing, the budget on that, a lot. And then all of a sudden now it just plummets so much, and it's hurting so many families, especially immigrant family, who saved so hard and thought that, they finally got a medallion and they can plan for their future, and now they're stuck. So I think that we really have to do more to really help these families. I mean, the number of trips that you were talking about in your testimony from these, for hire vehicle, the number is very huge. And there's got to be a way that we have to manage that growth. All of a sudden, they're all over the place. And one of the things that I don't think the city is really looking at is the environmental impact. All of a sudden, we got all these cars. And especially my district in Lower Manhattan, I see people, taking these cars. A lot of it was the Uber or whatever. And it's like they could have just walked to the corner and they could get a yellow taxi easily. But no, they wanted somebody to pick them up right in front of their house. And it's causing a lot of chaos and congestion, especially on these narrow streets. So what I'm asking you is, what is the TLC doing to really help the yellow taxi industry?
So you raise a good point about how the FHV industry is different than all of the other sectors we regulate, and that is it has no growth control mechanism, no built-in environmental review, no built-in community board review, no built-in DOT review.
But that's not fair. Why couldn't we institute those?
That's something that is under your jurisdiction, and I don't have the authority to do that. I can't limit the number of vehicles or drivers that we license.
You cannot.
No.
They should be playing by the same rules.
They have two sets of rules based on state and local law. The medallion has a capped system of vehicles, and the FHVs has an uncapped, and the agency's jurisdiction isn't large enough to make a change in terms of the number of vehicles that come in under the FHV sector.
So do you suggest that we definitely need to do something to restrict and manage the number? I mean, this
I
is
think
just...
we've done a very important first step, which is gather trip data so that we as a city understand where are these trips happening and are these cars being utilized in the best way possible. And we recently get drop-off data as well, which will tell us and the public a lot more about where the activity is happening. With that kind of information, I think we would work with DOT and City Council to understand what exactly is the right mechanism to create some sense of alleviation to some of the problems that you've pointed out.
So how soon will you have this data available?
We're just now getting it, but it takes quite a while for us to compile it from 900 bases. But we're happy to keep you up to date on as soon as we're able to give a public report on it.
Do you have any projection in terms of time frame? Within
I'd
6
say
months?
definitely
3 months?
before the end of the year. Definitely.
Okay, so within 3 months, you
Yeah.
should be able to get something.
Now you're saying 3 months, but that's good. You're negotiating.
Well, that's before the
We'll
end of the
try.
year.
How about that?
Yeah, because we need to do something.
Yeah, no, we're happy
because-
to give you that information, and you can see, like, on a map, it's, when you map the trips, you see where it's all happening. And I think that's very important for city planners and for city council to know.
Yeah, because we institute, the green cab to help all the other boroughs and Upper Manhattan, whether that is effective or not. And we would really like to know these app-based
Yeah, that's a good point.
for hire vehicle, are they really going to neighborhoods where people couldn't get a taxi? Or are they just concentrating, in the central business district or in lower Manhattan and Manhattan neighborhood where there is availability of yellow cabs and other services?
So we look forward to sharing the data with you, and it'll be able to answer some of those questions.
In that we certainly are very much concerned. My district, like many other working class communities in the city, have a lot of yellow cab operators. And I certainly, while knocking on the doors during the summer, I've heard their concerns and I've heard their disappointment in the city that they have made these major investments, that not only do they have these notes, they have mortgages and home mortgages as well that are predicated on them, the services that they're delivering, and that's not happening. It's not happening because we are not controlling and regulating the industry, that folks have pretty much come in and that we have regulated them in a way that what you can do, when you can do it, but not just that, who can do it. And we have specific criteria, checks and balances, and on these operators and the owners. We've allowed people to enter the industry who don't have to meet the same standards, and that's unfair. At the very least, we have to ensure that app base has to do the same thing, right? So that I had my father-in-law over last weekend, and he turned in his radio on his black car because he couldn't compete. And he's just pretty much given up. And that was an investment that he couldn't afford to lose, as in many of the folks here that we see today that invested. And so my concern is, number one, is whether or not we say that we don't have the ability to regulate those folks coming into the industry. I know that we've done with this committee and through legislation a lot of work ensuring that those who are operating within the industry were operating safely, efficiently, and that they were serving a target audience. And what I see is that the yellow cab industry has to adhere to those criteria and others don't, and that's an unfair advantage, right? Certainly. And it continues to happen because we recently have Chariot app service for vans entering, and all the work that we did around commuter van, they don't adhere to any of those, any of the policy and legislation that we put forth, and that's unfair. And so I think that certainly that there is something that we could do more. But I also believe that in these certifications, you mentioned about licensed drivers and certification. Everyone who drives a yellow cab has a certification. Everyone who drives an MTA bus has a certification. But yet you can drive an app-based part-time driver, a license for 2 weeks. That's just not fair, and it's not safe that we put people on it, that this is a profession, that people will invest in not just their dollars, but their time in being safe, being accessible, understanding the dynamics of the city and being able to serve the people of this city. And it's unfair that people show up with no training, no understanding, and they're able to take business and money out of the mouths of these families here. And we as a city can do better. Any response?
It is different for commuter van, and I know that's an area of particular concern for you with respect to recruiting drivers, because they have to meet state standards, 19A standards. So it's a state requirement, but we're happy to work with you to see if there are ways that we can broaden the pool for commuter van drivers, because I know that is of concern, and the commuter vans, the legal commuter vans, are the lifeline of your neighborhoods.
Has there been anything done to address this new Chariot company?
Chariot, yeah, we've talked a lot, we know a lot about the commuter van issues from our discussions and meetings, and Chariot came in as a black car company. So they did not come in as a commuter van company. We will keep you posted on the amount of activity.
But what are they?
They are a black car company.
What are they? Are they commuter vans? Are they vans? Are they black cars?
The definition of black car
has
has
15 passenger vans, or are they black cars?
A black car is anything now. A black car can be a green car. I mean, that's
See,
where
that's
we
exactly
are.
why we find ourselves in the position today that we're in, because this is not just that we're being ambiguous.
Definition of the black car, if that needs to be
We absolutely
refined.
need to define, as a matter of fact, who is who and what is what, so that we can take charge of this, so that we can protect the livelihood of folks, that we can't have industries. No, we don't do that. That we can't have people, corporations coming from outside of New York City and taking over industries and just moving people out of jobs.
So we'd be happy to work with City Council where the definitions in the ad code of black car, Lux Limo live. And if there needs to be further work on clarifying and refining those, we're happy to work with you on
These guys have come in and they've pretty much, without everything that we worked years on, regulating those commuter vans, and whether or not they were usurping MTA, whether they were operating safe, accessible, they don't have to do any of that. So we spend all that time in here. They're going to knock these guys out of the industry, and now we spend another 4 years trying to regulate them.
And while
We
we're
should
on
be
the
ahead of the
topic of
curve.
commuter vans, I do want to report that we have rolled out our forfeiture program that began December 2016, and we've done quite a lot of work on the illegal commuter vans. We've
Yes,
seized
you have.
about
We appreciate
15, and we don't give them back. They
Now
go
we
for
got
civil
these guys.
forfeiture.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
When we talk about traditionally the role of the TLC, do you see it as part of your mandate or role to try to protect the investment of the medallions? Obviously, many folks, many of them who are here today, they've invested their life savings, and this is perhaps their one largest asset that they own. Is that something that you view as part of your mandate, or where does your agency figure into that equation? Aside from the standard, we all know what it is that you do in terms of technically what the TLC does and the rules and the regulations and the oversight, but do you view that as part of your mandate to try to protect the value of these medallions?
So we view our mandate as that stems from the charter, which says we protect and we do transportation policy that affects drivers, public transportation, passengers, and the businesses that operate within it, within that. There is lots of litigation about the exact question that you've asked me on what exactly are the meaning of those charter phrases. So I will decline to comment further on that because that's happening through litigation. But generally, we defer to the charter, and the courts are now going to decide what the charter really encompasses or not.
Okay, so for those of us like myself who are not familiar with the intimate details of that litigation, without saying something that would impact on litigation, you must have a position. So what is the TLC position as to what your role is in terms of the value of those medallions?
Our role is to make sure that the public and those who operate have good service. And from good service flows revenue, and from revenue flows increased values. So the consequence of good service is increased values. And we really want to focus our efforts in making sure that there are good cars out on the road, that there's efficient ways for passengers to get them, that drivers are qualified to drive them, and all of that adds up to revenue, which increases value. So you have to start with service when you're deciding what value is. That's the perspective that we have here at the TLC.
Okay, I guess let me ask you differently. Is it fair to say that as part of service, having a rider owner who was invested in the medallion, who's been there for years, who continues to drive, that might be something that would benefit the industry, and that perhaps the falling values of the medallions might be having a negative impact on the ability and dedication and commitment to do this as a long-term prospect, which many people have done over historically for years?
The declining values are surely having an incredible negative impact on those individual owners. But I think you're right. We have long supported the owner-driver model because it does what I referred to in my testimony. The owner-driver is invested in every part of that process. Their car is clean because they drive it every day. They're dependent on the fares because the fares determine how much of their earnings they get to take home. They're not in the garage model where there's siloed payments like lease cap payments and monthly medallion lump sum payments. And so they are the epitome of the smart business strategy. Today's values are certainly hurting them because the loans that are attached to those medallions that they did work very hard for and have earned income on for many years are not able to meet the loans that they're due every month.
Sure. I guess what I'm really getting at, which is even more specific, is that we're now discouraging, right, a whole generation of individuals who might have gone into this business or this industry to take it in as a serious potential business opportunity from participating, because essentially the message to them is that the values of these medallions are declining and we're not going to step in to help you with your investment. Do you see my concern from that perspective?
I think I see your concern. It's like, what is the model going forward? And we see this phenomenon not just in the taxi industry. You can look at Amazon or Walmart or so many of these companies that are now operating in large scale that make it extremely difficult for small businesses.
And
I think that's
time,
a microcosm of what's happening here in the taxi industry.
But Commissioner, to be fair, we in the city didn't sell contracts to those stores, for example, that were selling electronics, giving them some sort of exclusivity over the electronic business, where we did essentially to the taxi medallion world saying, hey, you're going to have an exclusive, and in return for this exclusive, you're going to pay a premium, right? So if I decided that I'm going to open up David's electronics shop, I didn't pay a city agency a premium for that. I just simply opened up David's electronics shop. Now Amazon came and put me out of business. That's fair. But if I paid the city a premium so that I could be the only person who sells electronics at 250 Broadway, and now someone else is selling electronics at 250 Broadway, well, I think it's a fair question as to what role the city should be playing in that. But I'm out of time, so I just want to ask one final question. Are there any lessons to be learned from London's actions with Uber? I'm sure you've seen the news recently,
yes,
where London stepped in. What's your assessment of that, and how do you think that relates to New York City, in a very different model, obviously, right? Here in New York, there was a lot of pressure. It seems like the city backed off. And then in London, you have a model where there's a lot of pressure, and it seems the city just said, well, we're shutting you down. So what do you learn? London's another major metropolitan city. We always like to compare ourselves here
Yes.
to London. So they have better accents, of course, but what do you view as the lessons from the London model, and how does it apply to the TLC and your relationship with Uber and the other similar kinds of companies?
So we did have the opportunity to speak to Transport for London to get some better understanding of what's happening there. The license was not renewed. Should Uber appeal that decision, they continue to operate. That includes adding drivers and adding vehicles while that case is pending through the courts, which they estimate could take 3 years. So there's no immediate change on the ground for Uber unless they decide not to appeal, in which case they would be shut down immediately. Some of the concerns that they had are ones that we address in our backgrounding process. It sounded like they didn't have confidence in the agencies that Uber was using to vet drivers. Here in New York, we vet those drivers ourselves. We are in charge of the fingerprinting in the DMV. They were also concerned about Uber's involvement generally in grayballing, and their Transport for London is a little bit different than TLC because it works at sort of state, local, and federal levels. Here, the inquiry into grayballing is the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice, and that's an active, open investigation, my understanding. And should we get information from DOJ, we would absolutely take action.
So are there any lessons to be learned from their interaction with Uber in London? Is there any takeaways from your
it's
perspective?
very similar. They're facing, it's similar in the sense that the Uber is in their for-hire sector, just like it is in ours. They call it private hire there. They have a little less information about how their taxis and Ubers operate within the city, but I can't say at this early stage that there is a lesson, and I also would like to see a little bit more fleshed out about the reasons for the non-renewal, which I think will be forthcoming as the case gets litigated.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Greenfield. We're going to do a second round, but being that I am sitting in the chair seat, I'm going to take a privilege and kind of stay on that. But you talked about delivery of services, but we want to talk about the consistency of that, whether or not they're being delivered the same and throughout the industries. And some folks, as you said, and I don't want to stick on the commuter vans, but just those who are providing transportation throughout the city. As we have folks who have purchased medallions, we also have folks who have historically have franchising rights, and these Walmarts or others that come, corporations that now come in and sort of just circumvent that franchising. They just stop anywhere they want to stop and pick up anywhere they want to pick up. That seems to be problematic, and it seems that the city is saying that there is not consistency in services, but it also, to me, would appear that we are abdicating our responsibility as a municipality to ensure that all of our citizens have safe and accessible transportation and equitable transportation, no matter where you are in the city. If you don't have the ability to regulate folks, then you can't ensure that. And if you allow people to come in and think you're going to regulate them after the fact, then we have a problem. Whereas we could kind of foresee all of the app-based participation that is coming into the industry. One of my, again, I would like to say also is that safety should be our paramount concern, and whether or not 24-hour online is equivalent to the services that folks are being trained, being retrained consistently based on what industry that they're in, whether or not this is a requirement of those who are entering the industry, and how do we ensure that these things occur. First, that you're not impeding on those who have invested in franchises, that we are not impeding on those who invested in, and certainly those who have invested in medallions as well. As the council member said, that we do believe that those who have invested life savings here in this city should be protected by that. That's the agreement that they entered into, right? That this has a certain value, that value being assessed and determined by a government entity. That we should know that it's going to be able to sustain that value, at least for the foreseeable future, not 2 years later decreased by 90%, and we're just throwing our hands up saying, well, it's okay, and continuing to allow people to come into the industry. So I would hope that we can do better by that, and you did talk about working with the council, and certainly we have a plethora of ideas that I think that could be helpful. But if the admin is going to take the position that these are job creators, as what occurred in the past, then that is counterproductive. It really is. I remember doing a hearing, and these people were promising that they were going to create 10,000 jobs, $50,000 a year, and all these other things, and the average driver now drives less than 20 hours a week. And we have 5 times as many cars on the road. We missed something there. So I hope it can be better. Councilman Grodenchik?
Mr. Chair. Commissioner, this is an administration that seems to enjoy regulating every aspect of life in the city of New York, including areas where many mayors have failed to wander into before. And yet I don't get a sense of urgency. I appreciate your being here today, but you know, I have many constituents, my colleagues here also have many constituents who are in danger of losing their homes, losing their livelihoods. The value of medallions have dropped nearly 90%, depending on how you count. But I don't see a sense of urgency here from the city in rectifying this problem. I don't mean to suggest that the city of New York should prop up the market artificially, but I also don't mean to suggest that we wring our hands and say there's nothing that we can do about it. And I want to know whether or not, I've been reading the back page of your testimony here, and I don't get a sense whether you even support this legislation, because you didn't really answer the question.
I think we said we support the legislation as long as the advisory board that is a consequence of the legislation includes vital participants. And I think Chair Rodriguez started out correctly in noting the ways that we could expand it so that the drivers and medallion owners and lending institutions are part of the conversation. We'd be happy to discuss with you if there is an action that can be taken that can quickly reverse things. That's something that we'd love to discuss with you. Many of the quick things, the deadlines that are upon people that are crushing them are their bank loan deadlines. And that we've met with the banks. I've given them my non-banking suggestion that they write off the loans and they let people borrow at rates and sizes that make sense for those borrowing them given today's market conditions, because having a borrower that can pay you something is better than having a borrower that can't pay you anything. But I don't have any jurisdiction over them, but I'm more than happy to make my views known to them. And you have a lot of owner-drivers that this is their life, so they do want to continue to drive a taxi. It's about the medallion value, but it's also about their profession, and that would allow them to continue to do that.
There is precedent, not in the taxi and limousine industry, but many years ago when I worked for former borough president Claire Shulman, she didn't have the authority, but she worked out co-op and condo at the depths of the 80s and early 90s, at the worst of the co-op and condo crisis. Bank, I can remember, I believe the number was $18 million that the Bank of Tokyo alone ate on a loan on the Acropolis, which I believe is either in Costa Constantine's district or Jimmy Van Bramer's district. So there is precedent for this.
Well, that's heartening to know.
What?
That is very heartening to know.
And I will tell you, she had absolutely, you can look through the entire city charter, you can hold it up to the light. There is absolutely nothing granting the Borough President of Queens the right to work out co-op and condo settlements. And yet she did, and she saved the apartments, the family homes of 20,000 families, saving at least 50,000 people from being homeless. And the best part of it was we also saved them from, they would have still owed the money, their share of the underlying mortgage, so it would have been a total disaster. And while maybe we can't do that here, but I'm sure there are things that we can do.
Well, you heard from my colleagues, and we will hear from the medallion owners and from the industry. This is a crisis that is affecting our city. I remember when I joined the council in 2009, and we get the briefing for our budget. The line of revenue coming from the yellow taxi was there in large number. In the last few years, we are in zero when it comes to the revenue that the city is able to collect because they sell of medallions. So I think that, this is not only, a crisis that is affecting those 6,000 individual medallion owners, the private sector also who invest in the corporation, but this is also the city is losing millions and millions of dollars because we are not able to raise those revenue, and those money are needed to keep expanding our firehouse and for after school programs. So, this is, I just feel that we are against the clock. Can we turn, this crisis back? Will require, a lot. We have seen what is happening in London, right? We've got to learn from what's happening. The traditional taxi industry, they also been organized because they feel that the way of how the other player came to the country was not fair for the traditional one. And that's what I always will be advocating, working for. Level the playing field for everyone so that everyone should have a fair shot in order to make their living, get a return from the investors, and be able to keep the house, to pay the mortgage. But you talk about that now, the definition of black card is something that is not there. I remember when I used to work in this area, washing dishes, food concert restaurant, people who used to work in the private sector, when they talk about a black card, the black cards will be institution, and we have met with many of them, having a family business, people being able to build and maintain the black card industry for generations. But they used to have an account with those companies that they provide the services to. So, and that group is there. So how many vehicles do you think do we have right now in the street of New York that are not that traditional black card, that they provide the services based on agreement and with the providers and the clients going to pick up because they have a bank account? Like, how many of those cars do we have there?
Is the question how many vehicles do I think are doing app-based trips?
Yeah, with as you say, with a new black card that is not a traditional black card.
Right, and the definition for the black car in the ad code is simply that they do 90% of their work non-cash. So I think we're at least 70,000 vehicles.
And there's no limitation, right?
There's no limitation.
However, the yellow taxi industry, they are limited, right?
Yes.
You cannot sell a medallion because, and even in order for it to be in medallion, you have to have environmental impact, right?
Yes.
But those 70,000 or 100,000, they don't have to do any impact.
Correct.
It's like, what is TLC doing what is the assessment that you've been able to make when it comes to that reality that we're facing today?
Well, I think one assessment, and I think this really came out of our April hearing, is with this kind of oversaturation, it's harder and harder for drivers to make a living. They're either not getting the amount of work that they used to get in the past, or with a reduction in prices for passengers, they are also seeing a reduction in prices and fares. So that is something that we're looking into in earnest, because on the yellow taxi side, we do have protections for drivers in terms of pay in the form of the lease cap. But the oversaturation of vehicles is surely having a detrimental effect on the drivers that are in the market today.
But the oversaturation is only coming from one side of the industry.
It's
Because
it's
the
in
yellow,
for
they don't
hire
have,
sector.
they don't have the flexibility.
Excuse me?
I say the yellow taxi industry, they don't have any flexibility to add an additional car because we, by law, as city and state, we limit on the number of vehicles.
Right.
However, we don't have any cap on how many livery or black car we are giving licenses today.
That's correct.
And I hope again that, that we can address it. Do you think that we should have a cap?
As I said to Councilmember Chin, it's important to make decisions with information. And I think Councilmember Chin made a good point. Let's see where these cars are operating. Are they operating in places where there's already ample transportation? Are they operating in areas where they are also competing with buses and other forms of public transportation? Or are they operating in the outer boroughs where we have transportation deserts and they're vital parts to people's daily commute and getting to social functions? And those kind of finer questions, I think, need to be examined before there's a decision made on what, if any, action you take going forward. But now that I've got a deadline from Councilmember Chin to have that information to you in the next few months, I think we'll be in a better position to see what the next move is.
How many yellow taxi are they ready to provide services for individuals with wheelchair?
Today we have 1,800 yellow taxis that are accessible.
How many green?
We have about 800 green taxis that are accessible.
How many permits do you have for green that you have not been able to sell because there has not been a demand from the market?
I'll have to get that number for you, but we are on tranche 2, so we have the whole third tranche. If you remember, there were 18,000 issued, and we've only gone through the first one and part of the second one, so we have more than half of them still available. Some of them have come back, so they're available again. And the number 18,000 was set by state law. I don't know if it represents the market, but the fact that we have only sold about half of them shows a sort of decline in people's interest in that as an investment.
Many of these questions are related to the role that I see the Commission playing, the task force. I just want for us to start thinking about those questions. How can we incentivize those potential green taxi driver that they can buy the permit? The sector, the yellow taxi, that they already can use a accessible vehicle, but there's a market of a sector, right, that is there, that is around $500 million. There's a need that the black card, a responsibility that they should have. Can we work together to centralize the services? For individuals with wheelchair to be able to say, here we have those additional 3,000 green taxi that they can be available. There's another 1,000 of vehicles from the yellow taxi industry. But can we hope to build that market? By working with the MTA and be able to make this group the central core. I think that the farther now, there's some pilot project, but is everyone trying to take a piece?
No,
especially
for the MTA pilot project, there's one participant, and I believe in the near future there'll be a second taxi participant. So I think we'll end up with 2 participants in the taxi sector. It's open to FHVs, but there's been no FHV participant yet.
Is Uber part of that pilot project?
Excuse me?
Uber, is Uber part of that pilot project?
No, it's not.
At no level, they are not involved.
There is only one company that is allowed to pilot it today, and that is the Curb app and Verifone.
Okay. You've been a partner in this conversation, but I think, again, that we have failed. We, the city, lied to this industry. And I think this is like the housing crisis. People buying house in Florida and other places. And then later on, they found out that they didn't have the real price value. And I think that this is a time for us. Like, for me, I don't get it, Commissioner. It's talking about that there's like close to 100,000 new apps company, that they are not the traditional black card industry, that they have, a bank account agreement with the institution that they represent the black card. Talking about those that they are trying to get the passenger from the airport, the JFK in LaGuardia, that they waiting for that market there. They are the one who also getting the services in the Midtown area. Like, when can we have a plan to say there's a zero tolerance translated in action or enforcing against those individuals, taking the food away from those people who invested $100,000 and those drivers that, as immigrants as we are, they rely on that industry to say we can make a living. So, for me, this crisis is so big. We need to act. We have to come together. And I think that we have to send the message. And too many, having an open numbers of people getting new cars from anybody else except yellow taxi. I'm not saying that we have to be making the number the same as the other industry. But I think that we have to have a limit on how many those people, how many cars those new company that now they call it black card, that they're not, and we have to describe, we have to come out with a definition of what a black card industry is. So, but I hope that we can work together with this and many others. If my colleague has any other questions, Margaret? No. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.